and welcome. You're tuning in to Unbreakable Hope with me, your host, Jessica Rose. This podcast is all about seeking the light. In each episode, we chat with someone who has either overcome the darkness or who is actively spreading light within their own community. So let's jump into today's episode. I'm super excited to introduce today's guest to you. Michael is an amazing human being. He is a first responder, served in the military and in the police. He holds a Distinguished Service Medal, and he's also an international best-selling author for a really good reason. I hope you're ready to jump in today's chat because we're going to be talking about service, recovery, and reaching out for support when life gets dark, especially within our first responder roles. Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited about our chat. I feel like this is long overdue with the two worlds that we work in.
Very much so.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to you, let you introduce yourself, and we're going to get into some really amazing topics today.
Yeah, I have a very long story, but for the intro, I'm going to keep it very brief. I am a former Air Force captain, security forces. I served all over the world. And when I got out, I went into civilian law enforcement in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I worked a bunch of different assignments, including being undercover for 2 years on a statewide drug task force. And as a brand new sergeant running patrol teams on the street, I was involved in a very tragic incident. And that incident really changed my life forever. And it set me on the path that I'm on now. And that path is to smash the stigma when it comes to talking about mental health, especially for those serving in our military forces and as first responders. So firefighters, police officers, dispatchers, and paramedics. And so my life today is literally dedicated to that, trying to stop this suicide crisis amongst all of them and save as many lives as I can.
And I love that. Someone who I've never got a chance to meet you in person. This is actually our first time really talking, other than like a few messages here and there on social media. That's how I found you, is through all the suicide prevention work that I did. And I love all the stuff that you're putting out there and talking about it, because I'm a firm believer if we don't talk about it, we keep it in the dark. So I love your willingness to be able to share your story. I'd love to just give you an opportunity. Maybe we start there, is your story and what really changed this and how you've now become such an amazing advocate for the mental health world for our first responders.
For me, I was that typical military person, first responder, where I never talked about feelings. I never talked about emotions. I was a hard charger. I was out there usually working the graveyard shift, trying to arrest as many people as I possibly could to make the streets safer. And my goal was to go undercover, which eventually I did. And during that time, I got married, I started a family, but I didn't use healthy coping mechanisms to deal with all the horrific things that we see on the job, both as military members and especially as first responders. And I didn't establish that healthy rapport and healthy communication at home where I could come home and vent about a bad day or bad things that I saw and dealt with. Part of that was I thought I was protecting my family by not talking about those issues, kind of shielding them from the realities of how dangerous our job really is. And so 8 years into my civilian law enforcement career in the San Francisco Bay Area, I'd been just promoted to sergeant. And again, I was back on the graveyard shift running patrol teams. And this shift was right after Christmas. And a few hours from going off duty and being off for several days with my family, I was involved in a fatal shooting. Basically, where a armed subject with a huge knife was trying to kill a couple who was barricaded inside their bedroom in their condominium. And when we got there, that subject then turns attention on us and then try to kill myself and my partners. And unfortunately, we had to take his life, not only to save our lives, but to save the lives of that couple upstairs. And I go into much more detail about that incident in my book, and when I speak publicly. But for these purposes, I want to keep it as brief as possible. But that incident, I don't want people to think like that incident alone caused post-traumatic stress, because I know that it didn't. For me, that incident was really my tipping point. If you can imagine like a jar filling up as you're going throughout your career, and me not talking about things, not using healthy coping mechanisms, that shooting where literally I came within inches of being killed, And again, that incident really was my tipping point. It set off a series of events, including a federal lawsuit from the family, which drug on for over 4 years, where I had to constantly relive this incident over and over and over. And eventually, I was a defendant on trial in San Francisco in 2016. And during that time, my health started to fail. My marriage was over. I was fighting for custody of my beautiful daughter, my everything. My stepfather, who was my hero, the whole reason why I went into law enforcement, got diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer in his 50s. And literally, I was losing everything. And I got to the point where I really didn't want to be here anymore. I was purposely putting myself in dangerous situations on duty, hoping that someone would kill me. So, kind of the opposite of suicide by cop, but I was hoping for suicide by bad guy because in my mind, I felt, as long as I died in the line of duty, my daughter would be forever taken care of. She would always know who I was. My partners, my blue family would never let her forget who her father was. And I had this huge fear of, because of this child custody and this horrific divorce I was going through, that my daughter would never know how much I loved her and how much I truly cared about her. And so there was another tragic incident during this time that really saved my life. And that was the suicide attempt by my best friend, John. And John has his own chapter in my book, Relentless Courage, where he talks about his experiences from Vietnam. But I had no idea my friend John was suffering like he was. And I felt so guilty when he tried to take his life. And all I could think about was my daughter and what would be the effect on her if she ever found out that I got myself killed in the line of duty. And so a month after that, after 4 years of struggling in silence and complete darkness, literally losing everything, I decided to make that phone call to finally ask for help. And it was that call that saved my life. And eventually, after a long recovery, over 2 years of recovery for post traumatic stress, I then started this personal journey of trying to, share my stories to let people know they're not alone, to let people know that no matter how bad it is, no matter how dark it is, because I've been there, that you can come out of it and there's a whole new life waiting for you on the other side of this. And that's why I'm here today.
Yeah, you've been through so much life in just such a short amount of time. It's astonishing. And I think that's something that a lot of us forget is how much we've gone through. I think a lot of moments in our life when we think we can't make it through this, we made it through something else. And here you spent 4 years trying to make it through and finally being able to say, okay, I could use some assistance to help me get past this and get through this. I think that's something that's really important for people to understand is that it takes a village, right? It takes a whole team. So when we go through heavy things, I mean, I'm so grateful for my support system. And it sounds like you might have had some support systems, even though you were also losing some of those support systems through relationship and illness along the way as well.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I didn't realize just how many resources are out there and available for military members, veterans, and first responders. I mean, literally, there's hundreds and hundreds of different programs, retreats, nonprofits, confidential phone lines, text lines. I had no idea these things existed. And when I first started my recovery, thankfully, I got connected with a culturally competent clinician, someone who only works with first responders, someone who truly understands the uniqueness of what we have to see and deal with, because we are unique. We are special in that regard. Most people in their lifetime may have one or two tragic incidents in an entire lifetime. And, we have all the personal traumatic incidents like other people, but then you talk about our work related trauma, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of traumatic incidents, sometimes multiple traumatic incidents in a single day or a single shift. And it's just, that's not normal. Like nobody should be exposed to that. Nobody should see that. And so when I got connected with this therapist, she told me a very personal story about herself, which kind of opened the gates. It showed me that I could literally trust her with my life, that I could tell her anything and everything and not be looked down upon, not be judged, not be criticized, but if anything, have her wrap her arms around me and help get me through this darkness. And that's where I started learning about a lot of these resources, like the West Coast Post Trauma Retreat, which eventually I went through as a client, which now I volunteer as a peer. Programs like Save a Warrior, which I've also attended, weekly peer meetings, which are run by volunteers. They have them all over the United States. They're not affiliated with any agency, but they're simply discussion meetings where it's, you don't give your last name, you don't give your agency. And that's where I started meeting fellow brothers and sisters. And I realized that I truly wasn't alone, that there wasn't something wrong with me because I felt for so long that my feelings and the things I was going through was abnormal and that something was wrong with me. And I quickly realized in my recovery process that actually all those things were normal given all the abnormal things I had been exposed to and gone through. And so to hear, other men and women who I didn't meet until at these meetings and be able to fully open up to and trust them with my lives, that was life changing. And for whatever reason, and I always talk about this, but I think the most ironic thing, and I think most military members and first responders will agree with what I'm saying, but even though I could trust my coworkers, my fellow law enforcement officers with my life on the streets, whether that's like an active shooter situation, a domestic violence, a bar brawl, I mean, whatever it was, I knew they had my back. But for some reason, I didn't think if I ever opened up about who I really was or how I really was feeling, that they would have my back in the same way. And it's because of the stigma within our industry, our professions, where it's looked down upon and it's seen as being weak, as being vulnerable, as not being able to do the job. And that's the farthest from the truth. It takes true strength and courage to talk about these things. And I tell you today, that phone call is literally the hardest decision I've ever made in my life. And it took me 4 years to get to that point. But I'm so glad I did because had I not made that phone call, I know 100% I would not be sitting here today doing this interview. I wouldn't be alive.
Yeah, I think that is something that people don't give enough credit to, is because it's something that you're keeping inside, which you think, oh, if I stuff it down, I stuff it down. I don't want, like others to worry or others to think little of me and all these things, that the moment you speak it out loud, it almost makes it real. And maybe you've been able to just stuff it down and pretend like it's not real yourself and it doesn't exist yourself. But the moment it comes out of your mouth, it's like, oh, this is real. Like I have now admitted that it's real, it is. That takes a lot. One thing that kind of comes to mind as you're bringing some of this up, I know that I've trained suicide intervention with a lot of first responders, and we always talk about, the EAP programs and the peer support programs. But I love what you're bringing up is like, you were able to access resources that were completely separate from that and be able to get tied into a network of people that can support you without having to say, this is my full name and this is where I work. I love to talk a little bit more maybe about that. If somebody is saying, hey, how do I reach out? How do I go outside of my EAP? Sorry, if I'm not comfortable going to my own department or my own agency.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is that, there are EAP programs, right? But one problem with that is that a lot of times with EAP programs, you're referred to just random therapists in the area. And many times, if not all the time, they have no experience with military members or first responders. And so that's an issue number one. But I think the bigger issue is that there's always that feeling that if I reach out to anybody, whether it's within my state, my county, my city, my agency, that somehow someone is going to find out that I'm asking for this help. They're going to find out, what my problems are, what I'm dealing with, and that's going to directly affect my job, special assignments, potential promotions down the road, and it could be an absolute career ender. And, back when I went through this struggle, my shooting happened the very end of 2012. I finally got the strength and courage to ask for help at the end of 2016. And so even then, my department had peer support. We had a contracted, culturally competent therapist. We had all these great programs on paper, but nobody used them at the time. I didn't trust them. I didn't have rapport built with these people. And that's another thing I talk about is that, you really need to establish these rapport and these relationships before the big incidents happen. This should be something that you do early on in your career as more like a check-in. You know what? Like, hey, if these services are available and offered, maybe I just go once a year, twice a year, and I sit down with this person, get to know them, they get to know me, just get some things off my chest. And that way, if something big happens where I truly need them, I already know who they are, I know how to get a hold of them, and I already have that established relationship. Because otherwise, when the big one happens and you're at your darkest moments, to try to build that rapport and trust with somebody that you don't know, that you've never met with, that you've never talked to, that is very difficult, extremely difficult. And so, knowing that there's all these resources where literally nobody in your agency will ever be notified. They'll never find out about it unless you tell them about it. Many of them don't cost any money whatsoever. They're 100% funded by donations a lot of times, or programs run by volunteers, because I understand those can be barriers. But know that there's a lot of things that you can do before you ever have to think about notifying somebody in your chain of command, or notifying somebody officially. And just for instance, like my book, for instance, Relentless Courage, you can read this or listen to it in the privacy of your home, of your patrol car, in the gym with your earbuds on. And again, nobody needs to know about it, but you will see, hey, you know what? I'm not alone. Like this guy named Mike, I've never met, from California, he wrote this book, but he's telling my story in the book. And he's talking about how he got out of these struggles and what help he found. And, there's an entire resource section in the back of this book as well, vetted resources, many of which that I've used or know people that have used. And so that's why I think it's important for people to know that, you know what? If you don't feel comfortable going through your agency, I get it. I understand it. And that's okay. But understand there's a lot of other places that you can go to, and you can go to them right now. Like if you're listening to this or watching this, you can literally pick up your cell phone right now and you can start texting somebody. I mean, you can start looking up these resources. So again, just know that you're not alone, and know that there's not one thing that works for everybody. Usually it takes a combination of a lot of different things to get through post-traumatic stress.
Those are some really great tips. And your book is amazing. I'm an audio person. I'm learning to try and sit still to read. So I love that you had it on both options. But I mean, it's an international bestseller for a reason.
Yes.
So links will be below for sure. You brought up something that is, I, and a lot of the work that I do, like research and educating people and stuff, we say cultural competency all the time. And some people don't relate to it, some people do. But what I think is important about it is whether you like the terminology or not, there is a significance to that. And you were saying like when you found somebody that you could talk to, you felt like you could actually relate to her. And some of the things that I think of being in the military, some of the jargon, right? It's you don't have to stop and explain yourself. Is that one of the things that helps with a therapist to take a little bit of extra time, learn the jargon? And what are maybe some other things that if there is a therapist listening that they can do to make themselves more aware and open to being able to have conversations with first responders?
Yeah, I'll tell people that it's not as simple as taking a course or a seminar. I mean, that's not going to make you
Mhm.
culturally competent. What I would highly recommend is that for any therapists out there who are interested in working with first responders, get to know those agencies in your area. Talk to the people that run peer support within those departments. See if you can maybe attend certain trainings or certain meetings. More importantly, go on ride-alongs. If you're a citizen that lives in a community, most law enforcement agencies will allow for you to do ride-alongs with that department. You don't have to be an applicant. You don't have to be somebody who's thinking about being in law enforcement. You can simply sign up for, ride-alongs within your community, and that's really how you get to see firsthand what types of calls and things are these people dealing with. And if you do that enough times and you get to know people, you can start establishing relationships. If you're sitting in a patrol car for 6 hours with a police officer, conversations are going to happen. I mean, they just are. It might not be anything to do with trauma.
Mhm.
or things they're seeing or dealing with, but maybe that's where you start. Maybe that's where you start building that comfort zone, that relationship. But that's critical. And there are many trainings and courses that, yes, you should attend those. Those are valuable. They're very important. So I'm not discounting those by any means. But my point is that there's multiple things that you're going to have to do to become culturally competent. And so again, it's educating yourself, it's exposing yourself, it's building those relationships, and then it's trying to look at that viewpoint, that perspective, behind the lens of the people, the men and women who are out there every day, literally putting their lives on the line. And this may be controversial for some therapists or psychologists or psychiatrists, but I'm just going to tell you again my personal opinion on this. But the reason why I was able to build such a quick rapport with my therapist was because she told me something very personal, something horrible that had happened to her years earlier before she actually became a therapist. And you'll find that most therapists, they become therapists because guess what, guys and gals? They've had trauma in their own lives. Okay. It's just like first responders. A lot of times these careers pick us, we don't pick them. And so when she shared that incident with me, I knew, I knew that she could understand what I was going through because she's been there. And so, again, I'm not suggesting do this with all your clients, with all your patients, but you have to realize you're going to have to do things differently if you want to build trust and rapport with military members and first responders. There is no way around it. We don't care about your credentials on the wall. We don't care if you went to Harvard and got your PhD. That stuff means nothing to us. That's great for the layperson. The average citizen loves that stuff. We don't care. Okay. We care about who you are, where you've been, what you've done, and why you understand us.
I love that. Those are really, really good tips because as an educator, yes, trainings are great, but having that practical experience, I love that you brought up the ride-alongs and just getting to know the population you're trying to serve. I think that's great too, is because sometimes, like you go into a therapist, right? And you're about to pour your deepest, darkest secrets on someone you've never met before. So having a therapist that says, hey, you know what? I'm willing to share. I have a good buddy who he is a peer support specialist. He helps veterans in sobriety. And I'll never forget the first time I actually got to witness him telling his story to another friend of mine. And she told me later, she goes, why did he tell me that? He doesn't even know me. And I said, well, what do you mean? She goes, he told me a lot of personal stuff. I said, yeah, because you need to be able to tell your personal stuff, and she was at a place where she wasn't able to do that time and time again.
Mhm.
So that's what ultimately helped her. And again, like you said, not saying that everyone needs to do it, but I think that there is a time and place. And the more you get to know the people you're serving, you can kind of see like it's vulnerable. It's vulnerable to be a first responder, the person that people call when they're in need, the person that people rely on, and all of your colleagues rely on you to say, hey, I now need help. That's a very vulnerable place to be in.
It is. And I will tell you, you brought up something very important, but vulnerability is the key, the solution to solving this problem, solving this crisis. And I'm not just talking about the therapists or the psychologists, the psychiatrists, but I'm talking about the actual first responders within these agencies, especially supervisors at all levels. Perfect case in point is if you supervise anybody, whether that's one person or 50 people, how can you ever expect your subordinates or the people you lead to come to you in their darkest times and be able to truly open up to you and share things with you when they need to, when they have to, when literally it might save their life if you're not willing to do the same first. And so this is something, a point that I bring up every time I speak, every interview I do, is that you cannot expect other people to be vulnerable with you unless you're willing to be vulnerable yourself first. And just think about this. We've had people in our lives where, especially first responders, where we know something's off. We know they're not their normal selves. And a lot of times we'll ask them, like, hey, are you doing okay? How are you doing? And most times, first responders, military members, they're not going to tell you. They're going to be like, I'm fine. Everything's good. No worries. But see, this is where you have to trust that intuition. I call it your spidey sense. And you have to realize that no, something is off. And by you just asking that question, are you okay? It's not going to get them to open up. But let's say you say, you know what? You hit them up and say, look, can we meet up for coffee later in the shift, or can I take you out to lunch? Or if not during the shift, can we, go to breakfast after we get off work? Whatever the case may be. And so now you're sitting down one on one with this person, and you decide, you know what? I'm actually going to share something right now I've never shared with this person. I'm going to be open, honest, and vulnerable and lead into this. As opposed to, again, are you sure you're okay? No, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to be open. I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be transparent. And you will be amazed where that conversation goes, because that's where that trust happens. Again, this is all based on trust. And remember, how can you trust somebody to truly be vulnerable and open up to you when they need to if you're not willing to do the same first? And I will say that over and over again, not just for counselors, therapists, doctors. This is all first responders and military members watching and listening to this episode.
Yeah, definitely. I can I can 100% relate right now to the how are you feeling or how are you doing? And I kind of laugh because as like caretaking for my husband, like that role kind of out of the first responder piece of it. I've always been that person people will say like, "Hey, so what's new with you?" or "How are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, a talkaholic." But I find myself that when people ask me now about my husband after he's passed, I have this sense of, oh, let me not make it awkward for you. Let me hold your feelings, or let me reassure you that I'm okay so this doesn't get awkward for both of us. Because I've had a few situations where I've said it and I've gotten quite the reaction to where then it like kind of the whole conversation goes crazy. And I'm like, doesn't have to be, it doesn't need to go that way. But I could see that in certain circumstances when I like look back, like my time in the Marine Corps and stuff, is that certain times you don't want to say it because you don't want to put that on someone else or have that same reaction, right? So I love your thing is like, hey, let's go grab a coffee so this can turn more into how are you doing versus like, I'm actually invested and interested in to what's going on in your life right now. Not just like I think it's like a reflex, like when you see someone, you're like, oh, hey, how's it going? You're supposed to say fine, or how was your weekend? Oh, it was great. But there's not really any deep connection with those kind of interactions, I guess. So I love that, like taking time to actually make an interaction with somebody.
Yeah. And, that's the thing is like a lot of times when you ask that question, especially like in a work environment, the other person may be already walking away by the time you answer it. And they're not even hearing what you're saying because they're so used to just asking that question. And they really may not care. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But that kind of interaction, again, what message is that sending? It's kind of just like checking the box. Like, okay, I asked the person, are they okay? And they said, yeah, okay. And I'll tell you an ironic story, kind of a twist on this is that but there was a day where his boss came down, a captain, and was going around, doing that check mark of, oh, how are you doing? Oh, good to see you. How are you doing? And that day, I actually, I didn't like spill the beans, but it was kind of like, sir, actually, I'm having kind of a crappy day, and I'm dealing with some stuff. And I remember that supervisor that I like and respect, he pulled me aside later and he said, look, if the chief or the captain ever come down again and they ask you how you're doing, just tell them you're doing great, you're doing fine. And if you want to open up to me, you can open up to me, but don't tell them. And you know, I didn't realize the impact of that kind of statement back then. I get why he said that. I think part of it was he knew maybe that wasn't best for me because they probably didn't care anyways, and it's going to put a negative light on me. Maybe the other point was he, as my supervisor, didn't want to look bad to his bosses because, hey, why is your guy, venting to us when they have you? Because we don't want to hear about his problems. Maybe that was part of it. And I truly do think that he did care about me and he wanted me to open up to him if I needed to. But it's one of those things that makes you think like, okay, I've got a supervisor telling me literally, don't honestly answer that question. Just put on a happy face and pretend like you're all good. And I'm sure other people have dealt with the same, right? Because we put on this great facade, especially as first responders. As soon as we put that badge and uniform on, we've got to portray this image of strength and vulnerability, and just nothing's going to touch us, and our life is perfect. And it can be farther from the case. We all have things going on at home. We all have stuff we're dealing with, health problems, financial issues, family problems, and we all have bad days. So we really got to change this culture and make it okay to have these just open, honest conversations, not make a big deal about them.
Yes, I 100% agree, which is probably leads to the documentary that you were involved in. I believe it's Stigma of Help.
Yeah,
I've
there's
yeah.
there's a longer documentary film called Residual, which I was a small part of. There's tons of different first responders, and it basically explores like the different modalities of post-traumatic stress healing, what different things that work for people and their personal experiences. And Stigma of Help is a short 9-minute film. It was made by Mission 22, which is a nonprofit for combat veterans and also first responders. And it features myself, my co author, Dr. Shauna Springer, who's a psychologist, and John Davison, who's my best friend who saved my life, who is also in my book. And the whole purpose of that, it's not endorsing anything, it's not selling anything, it's just trying to help break the stigma of asking for help, just like the title. And I give a very small glimpse of my story in that film, and you get to see the key players. But I actually use that when I open up, when I speak all over the world. I open with that short 9-minute film. And so I highly encourage anybody watching this or listening to it, you can just go on YouTube right now, just type in Stigma of Help. It'll come right up. Again, it's only 9 minutes, not very long. The other one, it's over an hour. It's very well done. I highly recommend it when you have more time. And that one is called Residual. Same thing. Just go on YouTube, type in Residual, and they both should come up.
I love that. I'll include links for both of those down below too to make it easier for people to check them out because it's important to have these conversations and to talk about these conversations. Like we said, the more we talk about it, the better that we can make it for ourselves and future generations that we're bringing up. And also you'd mentioned about you're speaking internationally, which I think is so awesome, really getting your voice out there and your experience and helping so many people. And you actually have a speaking coming up here in April, right?
I do. So I'll tell you, first of all, I'm not one of those people that goes out and speaks like twice a week or every week. I only speak a maximum of 4 to 5 times a year.
Mm.
And there's reasons for that. I'll tell you, the first reason is that I used to always put my career and my potential promotions above my family, above everything else. And I'm at a point in life now where I have a 15-year-old daughter, I'm engaged, and living life to the fullest and being fully present, that is my priority. And so that's one of the reasons why I limit speaking to just 4 to 5 times. But the other thing is when I speak, I don't use a single PowerPoint slide. I literally show that 9-minute film, and then I speak for 3 to 3.5 hours, literally just ripping open my heart and soul every time and reliving my entire story for the world to hear and see. And I know it helps people. I know it saves lives, but it really wipes me out. And so, up until this year, I've spoken all over the United States, military units, FBI, Sheriff's Association, Chiefs Association, firefighter conferences, departments, I mean, all kinds of agencies. And recently, I was actually asked to travel to Italy and speak at Aviano Air Base, which is about 50 kilometers from Venice, to speak to all the active duty security forces members in the Air Force, the same job that I did, to share my story and help save lives. Because just like I said earlier, suicide is actually the number one killer over line of duty deaths, over combat deaths for military, veterans, and all first responders. The ugly truth is that we are much more likely to die by our own hands than the hands of another. And you think about that, we spend all this time in training protecting ourselves from the enemy, from the bad guy. But the reality is we are our own biggest threat. And so I'm elated, for the Air Force to recognize this and to fly, myself, a veteran, someone who served in that capacity, and travel all across the world. There is no honor bigger than that, I have to tell you. And I am just elated. I mean, this is an absolute game changer. And like I tell people, whether it's a podcast interview, a conversation, when I speak, it doesn't matter if it's 20 people or 600 people. If there's one single person that listens to this or watches this or hears me speak and it affects them in a positive way, maybe it saves their relationships, maybe it saves their career. Most importantly, maybe it saves their life. And then what is that ripple effect on their loved ones, on their spouses, their partners, their children? Because there is an absolute domino effect. It can either be a negative domino effect with suicide, or it can be people like myself sharing their stories and saving even more lives.
And I love that you also brought up how your priority is your family. You know, you're doing this, but it does take a toll on the body. And I also, as I'm hearing this, I think too, is like that's how important and powerful your message is that you're getting it out there and being able to deliver that story a few times a year, but there's that much impact that's being done every time you deliver it. And of course, you have your book, so it's an easy way for people to be able to, get in their hands to read it or listen to it on an audio device to be able to hear more about this and talk more about it. It's something that we just don't talk enough about. And when I was, after I got out of the Marine Corps, I ended up working for the National Guard, and I was their suicide prevention program manager. And I remember a couple of people saying the comment about that. Well, I'm worried that this is going to affect my career. And I'm like, oh, it is. Even if you don't say anything, it's going to affect your career. Like that's a guarantee. So there is with the first responder roles, I think that there's I would say maybe like a double misconception, right? Is when I was in the Marine Corps and someone close to me had thoughts of suicide, they, of course, couldn't go to the rifle range and you can't get rifle qualified. Well, that's a requirement annually to be a Marine. So it does affect your career, but then it also will affect your career if you don't do anything about it. So I'm obviously each department, each agency is different, and we've grown a lot since then. You know, I got out of the Marine Corps in 2011. So even how we handle cases like that, I'm sure looks very different. You know, it's over 10 years ago to think about it.
Yeah, and I think, what's important is that I personally don't think that post traumatic stress has to be a career ender for anybody. I will tell you that the longer you wait to get help, the longer it's going to take to recover. I know that if I would have asked for help much sooner, I have no doubt I'd still be working. I'd still be at the same police department. I have no doubt whatsoever. And so, what we need is we need agencies to be patient. We need them to give their people the time they need to recover and to heal. In my case, and we haven't gotten to this because I talk a lot of wasn't fast enough or as quick as they expected, that's where they turned their back on me. And that's where it became a career ender for me. I ultimately made the decision that I couldn't do the job anymore after seeing how I was treated and how I was being abandoned when I needed them most. And so that's why it's so critical to know that, look, yeah, this actually can affect your career in a positive way, because I can tell you that right now, speaking to you today, I am a much better person than I was back when I was working. I have a different mindset. I have a different viewpoint. I have more empathy. I have more sympathy. Not only would I be a better supervisor today, but I'd be a better officer on the street. Back then, it was like, no, I had no feelings. I had no emotions. I had a wall up. I didn't care about what people's circumstances were. I didn't want to hear what their problems were, whether it was on the job or on the street. Whereas now it's like, no, I've been through this. I've been on the other side, and I'm living proof that you can get through this. And so that's where we have to change this stigma. But you're right. I will say too that if you look at anybody in the military or any first responder, you can tell them, look, when you leave this profession, whether it's medically injured, you retire, you will not be the same person you were before you started. You just won't, period. And with post traumatic stress recovery, you're not going to go back to that same person before you started this career. That's impossible. But you can become a better person. You truly can. You can become a better parent. You can become a better partner. You can actually be present. I'm not just talking about physically present. I'm talking about being mentally and emotionally present for your loved ones, for your family, for yourself. And so, again, I'll say it again and again, but the solution is change the stigma, change the culture, and let's just make it normal that, you know what, when we're going through something, that I have people I can turn to and talk to, as opposed to now it's almost like it has to be this big huge thing. Oh my god, if I ask for help, then all these things are going to start happening. Like you said, some agencies may take your gun. My agency never did, and that's debatable. People have different viewpoints on that. But you take away someone's gun, that in itself can cause a lot of trauma to a first responder. That's showing the person that you don't trust them, that you don't have faith in them anymore. So again, you really have to think about how you treat people when they're asking for help. And you have to get out of this mindset that it's a career ender, because it doesn't have to be a career ender. It can actually grow your career, can grow yourself, and it can lead to much greater things.
So many amazing points, and you just have such a great way of being able to articulate them. So I'm really excited about this episode and how many people are going to hear it and be impacted by it. I want to make sure if there's anything that we missed, or if you have some final thoughts or something, because I think you've done such a wonderful job, and you have so many amazing resources out there and ways that people can connect with you and continue to engage to help spread this word.
Well, I do want to tell the story about my book because I think that's really important. So, Relentless Courage, Winning the Battle Against Frontline Trauma. I never envisioned or planned any of this. I'll tell you, like most, I could have just quietly gone away on my medical retirement and nobody would have ever heard from me or seen me again. And back in 2019, a year after I retired, some guy I didn't know who was a former cop. He was a fitness guy. I'm very much into fitness. And he reached out to me to be a guest on his podcast show. Had never done an interview, had never shared my story publicly. And I kept just brushing him off. I'm like, you know what? I appreciate it, but it's not my thing. And, fortunately, this guy harassed me in a way where I couldn't say no. And that single interview changed my life. I was so worried that when that episode came out, people would look down upon me. I'd start getting all these messages from my previous coworkers because I didn't tell them all what happened. They had no idea the things I was going through. I was still ashamed and embarrassed back then of having to go through this PTS recovery. And when that got aired, I started getting messages from all over the world, from other people who were sharing their stories with me. And I quickly realized that, my story is also their story. And I'm not alone. They're not alone. And that led to just podcast after podcast. It led to speaking engagements. But then, right before COVID, again, everything happens for a reason. I didn't know my co author, Dr. Shauna Springer. We were connected on LinkedIn. I'm maxed out. I have 30,000 connections and like another 40,000 followers. And she sent me a message one day right before COVID and just said, look, I like what you're doing as far as in the mental health arena and suicide prevention. And I would just like to set up a phone call to tell you about what I'm doing and see maybe if we can collaborate or we can help each other out. So I'm like, and I always accept. I'm like, yeah, no problem. Let's do it. So she calls me up, and it turns out, like I said, she's a Harvard graduate, PhD psychologist, but she worked for the Department of Veterans Affairs for many years, and she worked with hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of combat veterans. And so, again, culturally competent, she truly understands it. And now she works with a company in Chicago which trains doctors on stellate ganglion block. And I talk about that in detail in the book, but it's a physical medical procedure to treat the physical symptoms of post traumatic stress. And she stopped me and she asked me, she said, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I kind of laughed because I remember just being burnt out from decades of report writing. People don't realize how much writing is in law enforcement. I mean, it's like 95% of what you do. And I hate writing. I'm burnt out on it. And so I kind of laughed. I said, I've been asked this before. I said, but I just don't think with post-traumatic stress, like I don't have that same focus, that same concentration. I don't even have that drive to get something like that done. Leave the conversation at that. Week later, she hits me back up. She's like, look, Michael, she's like, I've heard hundreds and hundreds of stories in my work as a VA psychologist, but your story, I just can't stop thinking about it. Your story is going to save. I would like to do this book with you. And she'd already written 3 books. And I said, you know what? I just knew in my heart. I said, let's do it. And so, um, first year into the project, we didn't even meet in person. We did Zoom every single week. We started working on this project. And what I want people to know, what makes this book so unique, there's no other book like it in the world that I know about, is that every chapter has 2 parts. The first part is my story in my voice, all the way back to childhood till now. But the second half, Doc Springer comes in, she breaks everything down, she explains it in very easy to understand terms so that anybody, I mean, a teenage child, someone who has no exposure to anybody in the military or first responder, some random citizen on the street will see the actual human behind the badge and the uniform. And together, Doc Springer and I show the reality of what can be done between a culturally competent therapist and a first responder and the healing that can take place. And together, we show the way out of the darkness. We show a path to healing. And that's why this book is an international bestseller, because as word spreads, it's that domino effect where it's literally saving careers, it's saving relationships, but it's saving lives every single day. And so I tell people you can get it anywhere: Amazon, Kindle, Audible, paperback, hardcover. The Audible we did in our own voices. And I relived every single incident in the studio. And it's like watching a movie. It's gut wrenching. You're going to have hairs on the back of your neck standing up. Your stomach's going to be turning. But it's got that balance of Doc coming in and just bringing it back down and letting you know this is normal. This is okay. And here's how we're going to get out of this. And so, again, I want people to know that if you read or listen to this, please reach out to me on any of my platforms. I want to hear your thoughts. And I promise you, I'll get back to you personally.
Yeah, it's definitely a very, very powerful story and hard to I'd say put down, hard to pause as an audiobook listener over here. It's like I said, and you said too, right? It's an international bestseller for a reason and so powerful that I hope that anyone listening to this is willing to either grab a copy and read it or being willing to listen to the book too, because it's a very powerful story. And I'm grateful that you're able to tell your story because there's so many people out there who aren't at that place or don't have the supports. So it's really wonderful when somebody does have the supports and able to tell the story and get it out there to, like you said, help save so many lives, relationships, careers, whatever it may be, but especially saving lives.
Absolutely. Remember, we all have a story. And what brings me the most joy is, and I'm not exaggerating, but I have over 10 friends who I've met when I was speaking. And these people, all first responders, firefighters, dispatchers, police officers, they now have been speaking all over the United States. They have their own books now, and they're sharing their story. And like I said, and I'll say it again, but there is nothing special or unique about me, about my story. It's just that I'm willing to share it fully open, transparent, vulnerable. And so everyone listening to this, watching it, whether you're a first responder, military or not, we all have trauma. We all have things we've been through. We all have a story that could potentially save other people's lives. And so just remember that sharing is healing, not just for yourself, but for those around you.
100%. Thank you so much for your time and your energy that you share every day. Like I said, being able to find you on social media and connect with you. And I'm like, this guy, he's doing great work. And then being able to connect with you and hear all the amazing things that you're able to continue to do. So I appreciate you and your time coming on to talk to our audience and tell them more about you. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was an honor. And keep up the great work. Like I said, you're saving lives every single day yourself. So it takes teamwork in this fight.
Agreed. Agreed.
Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. If you found this episode inspiring, please share it with someone you never know who needs more light in their life. May this serve as a reminder that there's always darkness in the world. Do not let it consume you. Always seek the light. Please take a moment to do the good old subscribe, rate, and review. Your support means so much to me, and it helps me spread more light and love. Until next time, be kind, be loving, be human, and don't ever let anyone steal your hope.